With more than 200 million Americans planning for summer vacation, the travel nightmares are just beginning. In this week's Wake Up Washington, in swoops the Department of Transportation with new rules they say will hold airlines more accountable, specifically when it comes to refunds for cancellations, significant delays, and even delayed luggage.
In theory, passengers are already supposed to be refunded for a cancellation or a major delay. In practice, it often doesn't work that way. This isn't just about enforcing when something goes wrong, it's making it less likely something would go wrong.
The rules announced by the Biden-Harris administration significantly expand consumer protections in air travel that not only make the refund path easier, but will also save passengers over $500 million in hidden and surprise junk fees. But now a coalition of airlines, including Delta, American, United, and JetBlue, are suing the administration, calling the new rules an overreach. But should the rules go into effect, will any of this really make an impact on the horror stories Americans are facing in the not-so-friendly skies these days? Travelers across the country have been speaking out, and the list of complaints is long and varied.
I didn't know that they were offering refunds. I just got a free $15 meal credit on a flight that was delayed 2 hours.
We've been delayed since Monday and it's now Wednesday.
I'm getting ready to board and they said your flight is canceled and there are no other flights.
My flight was 3.5 hours delayed.
You may have to sleep over in the airport, who knows?
No, we were on the plane for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And didn't go anywhere?
No, we were on the tarmac.
No, then the flight was canceled.
They did lose a luggage on their way out here.
Unfortunately, now in this day and age, you kind of come to expect it.
Joining us now to make some sense of all the sky-high nonsense is NewsNation's travel editor, Peter Greenberg. Peter, thank you so much for joining me here today. You know, the new airline regulations will soon be required to automatically refund travelers if they cancel, delay, or make major changes to their flights. They've always been required to do that, so what's exactly changed here?
What's changed here is that they're being forced to actually disclose it. In the past, the rule was very simple. If the airline cancels your flight for any reason whatsoever, you're entitled to an immediate refund back to your original form of purchase. But during the pandemic, what did a lot of airlines do? They didn't volunteer that information. They gave people vouchers or future flight credits with expiration dates. It was like the draconian gift card. And that cost a lot of people a lot of money that they never saw again. So what the DOT is doing right now is they're reinstituting the rule with some additional provisions so that if your domestic flight is delayed by more than 3 hours, you get an automatic cash refund. If you're delayed by more than 6 hours on an international flight, you get the same automatic refund. But then they've gone beyond that with some additional rules. And that gets down into full transparency and full disclosure. And that's what gets down to about the pricing of your flight. When you go online to make a reservation, even today, you may see a fare that's quoted that looks very attractive, but what they're not disclosing is all the other hidden fees that you may be required to pay, whether it's baggage or ticket change fees, a whole realm of things. And what the DOT is suggesting in a new rule is that the airlines have to actually display those prices and those fees in the same position and at the same time that you're looking at that fare. You mentioned the lawsuit.
Right.
They're basically saying, oh, we can't do that because if we do that, it will just be confusing to passengers. It will inundate them with overwhelming amount of information. If it's going to save us $500 million a year, my response is, please inundate me. I'll be confused. It'll be fine. Look, we need to know what we're going to pay.
So, Peter, what are the hidden and surprise fees we keep hearing about with these airlines, and how will they be curbed under this guidance?
Well, remember, without financial consequences for bad behavior, the behavior continues. You may remember the tarmac delay rule. That was actually instituted about 12 years ago. And what it said was, after so many bad incidents, that if an airline pushes back from the gate with you on the plane, and they keep you on that plane on the tarmac for more than 3 hours without returning you to the gate, the airline is subject to a fine of up to $27,500 per passenger, not per incident. So on a fully loaded 737, you're talking 7 figures. How many tarmac delay rules have been applied in the 12 years that it's been instituted? About 3, maybe 4. So the financial consequences have had a deterrent effect, and the airlines have behaved well. That's what has to be done here. It's not a question of coming up with a rule. It's about coming up with the consequences, and that's what's being debated now.
So we mentioned earlier a coalition of major airlines like American and Delta are now suing the administration specifically over the new rule regarding these hidden fees. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg reacted to the suit Tuesday in a social media post saying that he was, quote unquote, speechless. Why are airlines pushing back on this?
Well, it's interesting because of the money. Airlines make more money in many cases from their ancillary fees than they make from the actual airline ticket or flying the planes. And the reason, there's an irony to this lawsuit. You mentioned American, United, and Delta and JetBlue suing the DOT. What's the one airline that didn't sue them? Southwest. They're the only airline that doesn't charge you to check bags. That should tell you everything. But the underlying reason why the airlines are pushing back on this now is because they're beginning to fear the possibility of re-regulation. Right? We haven't had that since 1978. That's when the Airline Deregulation Act came into effect, and it took the government out of pricing, out of routes, out of frequencies, et cetera. And that turned out to be a pretty good thing for consumers. It opened up travel to a lot of people. I'm old enough to remember when there were only 3 airfares in America: first, coach, and night coach. Now there are like 34 to 40 different fares on any one different flight. People have more choice. But what the airlines are worried about now is that if the DOT rule comes into effect, the DOT may make other rules that legislative bodies may not be able to make under the 1978 law. That's what they're worried about.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. After a number of safety incidents on Boeing airplanes, the Department of Justice is now considering charges for the aircraft manufacturer. Peter, should travelers feel safe on Boeing planes, and do you think this is going to affect summer travel at all?
Well, first of all, let's talk about some numbers here. We've just celebrated the 30 safest years in commercial aviation since commercial aviation began. And when I get on a plane, I have to figure out if the pilot's happy, I'm going to be happy. So that's the first thing. Let's talk about some other numbers. Last year, 31 million flights in 2023. How many fatal accidents? 1 in Nepal back in January of 2023. I'll take those odds any day of the week. But there's a deeper issue here. We can talk all day long about the great record of aviation safety, but that's not the issue. The issue is, can we maintain it? And based on the behavior of the FAA with other manufacturers and operators, and especially their behavior with Boeing, that calls it into question whether we can maintain it. That's why there's a DOT probe, there's a U.S. National Transportation and Safety Board probe, there's the Justice Department probe, and a recent probe by the FAA on the Boeing 787. These are necessary and essential to getting us back on track to a safety culture.
That perspective is obviously very important. So some airlines in other countries are looking at adult-only seating areas on planes with special areas for parents traveling with children. I'm from Orlando. There's always kids on my plane going to the parks when I go home. So this sounds interesting. Do you think this will even work in the U.S. going forward?
Actually, they need to do it a different way. One for adults and one for adults who act like children. Once you do that, we're okay. Because the incidents that we're seeing on planes today are still way too high in terms of people acting out and becoming violent and disruptive. The real issue here is whether families can be able to sit together without paying a surcharge, and that is now part of the new DOT rules, allowing families to be able to sit together without having to pay for an upsell seat. That, I think, is a significant change. And then if they can basically segment out those areas on the plane, it'll be a little bit better. But to have a completely separate section, I don't think it's going to be practical.
I want to talk weather. It's hard to make sense of some delays and cancellations, especially when you're about to take off on your flight and it's a completely sunny day with no cloud in the sky at your departing location. So do you have any expert tips on checking the weather before flying, and what should we be doing in this case?
Well, here's the deal. It's not about the weather where you are. It's about the weather where the plane is coming from to get you. So there are a lot of great apps out there now called FlightAware or Flight Radar 24 that can actually track your incoming flight to see if it's even left. Because you look out the window and it's a beautiful sunny day, as you just said. Where's my plane? Why are we delayed? Why are we canceled? That may be the reason. And that gives you a head start of maybe 2 to 3 hours to make other plans, especially if the weather is not where you are and you want to be able to get a plan B together. That's the way to do it. But remember, it's not about the weather necessarily where you are. It's where is that plane coming from and where are the delays there. And that's easy now to get with those apps.
Definitely a good tip to know. Finally, there's the age-old travel question in terms of air travel. To check or not to check? There's obviously not a lot of baggage room inside planes these days. What's your best advice on getting your luggage to your destination on time and really intact?
Well, one of my favorite sayings is there are only two kinds of airline bags, carry-on and lost. I'll let you laugh, but now we'll move on forward and talk about something more serious. Who lost and misplaced and mishandled the most bags last year? That would be United Airlines. They were followed by American Airlines. And by the way, look at that. Guess who had the best record of the major airlines? Here's the irony again. Southwest Airlines, the only airline that doesn't charge you to check your bags. So there's something wrong with the system here. And the other real problem is it's not just your check-in bags. In many cases, it can be your carry-on bags that can't fit in the plane because they've added so many seats on the plane that they're going to have to be gate checked. It's a mess. And this summer, with more people traveling than ever before, you know what? Go back to my idea of carry-on and lost and get on try to be in that first boarding group. You need that overhead space because if they have to gate check your bag, you've accomplished nothing.
Yeah, I feel like it's the Hunger Games, airline, gates getting into that first boarding group. Peter Greenberg, thank you so much for your advice and wisdom on this topic. We really appreciate it.
You got it.
Depending on who you ask, vacationers won't be the only ones zipping through the skies this summer. In the last year, investigations into what else is flying around up there have made their way to the halls of Congress. But it's not the first time UFOs have been the topic of conversation on Capitol Hill. Staff writer Rafael Bernal goes in depth this week on exactly what's being done to understand and investigate what the government calls UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
For decades, the idea of UFOs or UAPs or whatever we want to call them has fueled distrust of the government. Specifically, distrust in how the government decides what is a secret and what isn't. The stories have changed over the year, but the idea remains the same. One or several government entities have proof of advanced non-human technology. Historically, believers in flying saucers and little green men were dismissed as overeager sci-fi fans or just kooks. But we've come a long way since the 1950s. The most powerful proponent of UFO transparency yet, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, normalized and funded research on these phenomena. In 2021, Reid wrote a column for the New York Times where he said his staff told him to stay the hell away from the issue. Well, he didn't. And under his watch, Congress funded the first modern Pentagon program to research aerial phenomena. But that program largely stayed under wraps, though not classified, and it had a relatively measly $22 million budget out of $600 billion in defense spending. The Pentagon went through a few iterations of the UFO program until 2022, when it formed the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO. Cute. AARO is so normalized that it even has a public website. That site was mandated by Congress, so we'll never know if the Pentagon really wanted it that way. In March, AARO published a historical report of U.S. government involvement with unidentified anomalous phenomena. The report concluded that there is no empirical evidence of off-world technology in UAPs or for the existence of a secret government program. So that's it. Case closed. Except the report doesn't really explain much about the UAPs we've now all seen. AARO Acting Director Tim Phillips talked to reporters in March and said most UAPs were just aero trash, old balloons and stuff. But Phillips said there have been some cases of encounters with advanced technologies, but we can't discuss that here, and declined to answer a direct question asking if that technology was tied to foreign adversaries. And that's where national security and the right to know clash. Even Harry Reid, the champion for transparency on government UAP research, said he saw some things at Area 51 that must remain classified. We now know that base played a role in the development of stealth technology, for instance. So it could easily be hiding advanced technology of very much human origin. But as Reid put it, our government constantly balances the competing priorities of secrecy and transparency in a democracy. The question is our government getting that balance right?
The roller coaster ride continues with the latest drop from the New York Times, and this one is showing some concerning numbers for President Biden. 5 of the 6 battleground states still have Trump leading, which should be worry enough for Democrats. But the latest numbers also show a dip in support in key demographics for Biden, Black and Hispanic voters along with young voters. While Republicans take their victory lap and rally around Trump outside his New York trial.
This is a sham. This is not the United States of America. This is some third-rate banana republic. If this were happening in another country, we would be laughing at them as a sham democracy.
I think this trial is absolutely ridiculous. I think it's a sham prosecution. The Democrats are trying to beat President Trump in the jury box because they can't beat him at the ballot box.
They're using this trial as a hook. It's so corrupt. It's so corrupt, and everybody knows it. If Alvin Bragg thinks the American people will believe these absurd charges, take a look at the turnout at Trump events.
Democrats are staying strong, reminding the right this is only one poll with 6 months to go until the election. But without a major shift nationwide, could Biden be watching his re-election chances slip through his hands? It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thanks so much for joining me here today. First off, we have some big news this week as Biden and Trump finally agreed to 2 presidential debates. But it's not without breaking tradition, with the first one happening before either candidate has officially been nominated, and both won't be sanctioned by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Scott, how will this play out, and what differences will there be?
It's funny. I was watching that play out on Twitter or X or whatever they call it these days. I mean, that's pretty amazing. They put out the challenge and Trump accepted. I think they're still going through all the rules, but here's what's pretty obvious to me from the number standpoint. If you just look objectively at the polling average for Joe Biden, he's not doing well in the battleground states. If the election were held today, he would not be the favorite. Now, the election isn't held today. And so these debates are an opportunity for him to have a moment to kind of swing the momentum back his way. So I can see how, he wants them maybe a little bit more than Trump, and Trump, really wants them. So we'll see how the rules play out, but I'm expecting without the commission, it to be pretty free swinging and both candidates coming out at each other.
Yeah, it'll certainly be must-see television for a lot of us following this race. But Scott, I want to touch on something you mentioned. The bigger concern now for Democrats is holding on to their historically left-leaning voting groups. But the latest polling from the New York Times show Trump and Biden are narrowly separated with Hispanic voters. How surprising is it to see these results?
So normally it'd be very surprising, and it still is a little bit surprising, but the reason why it's only a little, not very, is because this isn't the first poll we've seen where Republicans are gaining on Hispanics, Republicans are gaining on African Americans, and the other crosstab in this poll that I don't necessarily believe, I got to see a couple more like it, is Biden and Trump are separated by only a few points in the 18 to 35 crowd. Basically what we're seeing here is the Democrats are giving up small but significant shares of voters that they've historically won with 70, 80, 90%. And that's just enough to tip it in Trump's favor in some of these states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan.
So we've talked about Georgia before, and the same poll showed Black voters who helped flip Georgia in Biden's favor in 2020 are showing less enthusiasm, like you said, to get out for Democrats. How are Democrats reacting to this dip among Black voters in particular?
I think it's a little bit of polling denialism, to be honest. Again, if Donald Trump got 23% of the African-American vote in Georgia, that would be historical for a Republican, modern-day Republican candidate. So I'm not saying it's not a surprising result, but again, this is not the first battleground poll we've seen where Republicans like Donald Trump are gaining among the African-American vote. And so, right now, I think the Democrats are in a little bit polling denial. We'll see if they change their campaign tune over the next few months, if we get some more public polling that kind of shows and continues that trend.
Yeah, you also mentioned this before. Another sign of Biden's struggles are with young voters. We've seen nationwide college protests attacking the president over his support for Israel. But what else do you think is driving young voters to sway away from supporting Biden if those crosstabs that we mentioned before are in fact correct?
I think it's right now it's lack of enthusiasm. Young voters are just they're not, both parties are not super happy with their candidates, but it's even more pronounced among young Democratic voters. They would really like to see somebody else. So I think that's where a little bit of that is coming from. I think a lot of them come back, proverbially home, voting for Joe Biden in the fall, or at worst, not showing up. I don't see them necessarily supporting Trump. It's really more about not showing up. But I think that a lot of that is you're seeing that as a protest vote in the form of polling right now. And again, it's just lack of enthusiasm for their candidate.
Switching gears, I want to take a closer look at this year's Senate races as Democrats are looking to hold on to power in the upper chamber. Maryland Senate primaries took place this week, and Prince George's County Executive Angela Also-Brooks defeated Congressman David Trone. Trone outspent Also-Brooks by 10-1 in this heated race. What are her chances looking like going up against former Republican Governor Larry Hogan in the general election?
Republicans got their best candidate in Maryland with Larry Hogan, but it's despite that, Also Brooks is going to be favored. I would put it, we're going to have her model out in a couple of weeks. I would still put it as she's the likely winner in that race. And it's simply because, Maryland is a Democratic state. She fits the demographics. She's got a good record. Doesn't mean Larry Hogan's not going to give her a run for her money, but she's going to be the favorite to win.
Certainly a tough race for Republicans, but Democrats definitely not taking it for granted either. Moving to West Virginia, they also held their Republican Senate primary this week. GOP Governor Jim Justice won in a race for the seat held by retiring Senator Joe Manchin. Manchin was obviously one of the few Democrats that has been able to flip the very strongly red state of West Virginia. But Scott, do you think has Manchin essentially all but handed Republicans his Senate seat, and how would this shift affect control of the upper chamber?
Yes, he's effectively handed that seat to the Republicans. Jim Justice and his famous dog, Baby Dog, one of my favorite campaign dogs out there. This is the pivotal seat in terms of, the Democrats really needed to be competitive in that seat because they got to win a couple more beyond this. But this is basically a gimme to the Republicans, and this is why the Republicans are heavily favored to take over the Senate, is because Joe Manchin basically ceded this one to the Republicans.
Further out west, we know big money is being spent in Arizona. Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego is launching a $19 million ad blitz, while his Republican rival Kari Lake has a $10 million ad campaign planned. Gallego has held a very narrow lead since February. Scott, are the numbers showing he will continue to lead throughout this primary, or could Lake close that gap?
Lake could close that gap. I always love these. I'm going to spend 10 million. I'm going to spend 20 million. We're 4 or 5 months out. We'll see how much of that money is actually spent for either side. Especially since, if you're going to say big numbers, at least if you're Kari Lake, you want to match Ruben Gallego's 20 million. I happen to think Kari Lake is going to close simply because I think Donald Trump is going to close in that state. So the numbers are going to get closer. But Ruben Gallego is going to be the favorite simply because he's got some pretty good name ID. Doesn't have the baggage Kari Lake does, and as shown, he is a very good fundraiser and is probably going to have more money than her.
New Jersey also has Senate primaries coming up. Both Republicans and Democrats are looking to replace Senator Bob Menendez, who is on trial for corruption charges. What should we watch out for in that race?
I guess gold bars falling out of the bag of his pocket. That's one of my favorite congressional corruption cases. It's one of those. It's New Jersey. It's a solid Democratic state. I know there's a lot of chatter about the Donald Trump rally in Wildwood over the weekend, but New Jersey's still going to be a solid Dem state for the presidential and for the Democratic side. Andy Kim is one of the favorite progressive candidates out there. He's an interesting guy. He's pretty charismatic. He would be a fresh shot of I don't even know what the address is. He would be a sea change from Senator Menendez. So I think he's going to be the favorite, and he's gonna come out of that this fall with being the new senator out of New Jersey.
So I want to go back out west. Montana was a state that rode the blue wave in 2018 when John Tester was elected, but now it looks like this year's race is really a toss-up. What polling are we seeing out of that state, and what are the chances Republicans can flip it back to red?
It's funny, if you're in the Slack channel over with all of the nerds we've got over at DDHQ, you go back and forth. I happen to think it's probably much closer to a toss-up. The more math-oriented people, and I'm math-oriented, but the real nerds think it's solidly Republican. If you just look at the fundamentals of the state, Montana is heavily Republican. It's had outsized turnout over the last 2 cycles. Donald Trump is going to, win ridiculous margin in that state. Tester is a very good candidate, and here's a number for you. While Tester outperformed the Democrats his Democratic counterparts in 2018, he did not outperform his win above replacement, as we like to say, or how much he should have outperformed by what as much. Now, he won, but he should have won by much more given the Democratic wave in 2018. So that is the take on him is, he's good, but he's not going to be good enough to overtake it. So I personally think it's a toss-up, but I think you're going to see our ratings be likely Republican, if not solid Republican.
Well, we'll be watching for any ratings changes on that race and all the other races we're watching. Scott Tranter, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And we want to hear from you. Leave your comments and let us know what's on your mind.